Kids are always getting into trouble. They always have. They always will. But most grow out of it. The teenage rebel becomes a solid citizen. But those days are gone. An increasing number of ordinary Australian kids are being locked into a future where crime, violence, and drug dependence are almost inescapable. These teenagers are the victims of many changes sweeping Australia. Victims of increased family conflict, of a collapsed youth job market, and victims of an outdated education system. Increasingly, they have no skills, no work, and for up to 40,000 of them, no home. As many as 1 in 5 of this generation may never find a decent job, nor lead a normal life. Their families have rejected them. Our schools have failed them. Our governments can't cope with them. Our community has disowned them. They're nobody's children. We have always had people in need. Those who can't get by without the goodwill and generosity of others. Those so institutionalized by the fortnightly welfare handout, they can survive no other way. They live on the margins of society, an underclass that has mainly been drawn from older members of our community. Now a rise in homelessness and long-term unemployment has forced a younger face to join this underclass, to share their warehouse accommodation, to share their soup kitchens, and to share their sense of hopelessness.
You've got to be independent. You've got to be able to feel that you're pulling your weight, you're working your own way through. You're getting somewhere, you're achieving something. While you're sitting on the dole, you're depending on everybody else, you're leaning on everyone else, you're just sitting there, you're popping your pills, you're getting nowhere, you're winning nothing, and you don't have to do anything. That's just about, that's the story of life. There's no hope. If I would have had the chance, if things would have been different, I would still be at home with my mother and father. I would still be probably at school or in university. I'd just carry on living a normal life. But as things are, I can't do it. I can't cope without the pills. I just can't sort of, I can't keep going without some form of motivation. And what form of motivation is there really? None. Because, you know, for the next 20 or 30 years, you could just be sitting in a place like this, going for breakfast in the park, relying on social security, bumming a cigarette off the next fellow that walks past, looking for pills in a doctor's surgery. Either that, or if you keep going on with the pills, you'll find yourself a nice little spot in Anderson Street in the cemetery there, already set out. That's the way it goes.
Up until last year, I'm a very mixed up kid. 2 times a day I'd try to be slashing my wrists. I'd be sniffing petrol, you know, sniffing glue. You know, just getting into heavy drugs and just doing crime.
When I used to work on the street, at least once or twice a month I was bashed or raped or ripped off $300 or something, you know. Just never know what's around the corner.
What do you see your future as in, say, 5 years' time?
Don't look that far ahead, only take it one day at a time.
How about a year? Can you see yourself in a year's time?
For 6 or 7 hours while you're on a trip or something, you don't have to worry about what garbage you've been through earlier on in your life.
What sort of future do kids like that have?
Death. Depends on how much they want to get out of it. I wanted to get out of it and I got out of it.
So what would have happened to you had you not?
I'd be dead. I would have died not long after I'd moved out of home.
In the Great Depression of the 30s, hundreds of thousands of men were out of work and homeless. They scoured Australia for jobs, sleeping where they could. But they were grown men, and this is a boy. His family disintegrated when he was only 10. Ever since then, he's made his own home. Tonight, an empty warehouse, a pile of shredded paper for a bed. This is something new. In the Depression, there were neighbours and extended families to share the burdens of parenthood through poverty and hardship. For too many children today, home has become a battlefield, and life on the street, for all its dirt and danger, the only refuge.
Tragically, I think we have a crisis on our hands. These children, these homeless young people, at the beginning of their lives, feel that they are in a totally hopeless situation. They feel alienated, they feel dispossessed, they feel as if there is nothing to look forward to except drug abuse and alcohol, and that's why they're trying to hide their frustration and disappointment and hurt, because everybody's let them down. The families let them down. Our school systems let them down. Our private sector, our government has let them down. They are unemployable. They can't get jobs. And it's not much wonder that these children now form almost a subculture and are so bitterly disillusioned that I think they will be a major problem for our community as well as for themselves.
The problems touching our youth are already having an impact on our lives. Youthful petty crime is now giving way to premeditated and sometimes violent assaults. It's now 4 times as dangerous for anyone to walk the street than it was a decade ago. And in that time, fraud, break and enter, stealing and rape have doubled. Many of these crimes are being committed by the tens of thousands of children trapped into living a feral existence on Australian streets. Their decline into crime is fueled by a struggle to survive. Some resort to violence, a violence they learnt at home.
Quite often when people come to talk about the sort of young people we work with, the first question they always ask you is, where did it all begin? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do to try and fix things up? The simple answer, and it is a simple answer, is that things always go wrong in the family. The young people who we work with, there's one common thread, and that is they left home at a very early age, and it's principally because whatever the family was like, it wasn't working.
Could you give me the address of that, please? Right. Right, just hold the line for a moment. Serious domestic at 193 Enmore Road, Enmore.
Conflict within the family is on the increase. The home life of one family in every 3 is marred by violence. Seventy 70% of all New South Wales police time is now spent attending domestic disputes.
Come back on, sit on one out.
One murder in 4 is a spouse killing. One half of all women who kill their husbands are reacting to threat of attack. A disturbing number of Australians accept violence as a normal part of family life.
Leslie. Leslie. Where's his...
He's gone.
He's gone.
Is he going to come back? She's on her way.
A recent national poll found that 1 person in 5 does not object to the use of violence by man against his wife.
Yeah, she came in.
He's not drunk and he hasn't got a firearm, has he? He hasn't got a gun or anything like that?
1 in 20 can justify in some circumstances kicking, punching, biting, beating, choking, or using a weapon against their wife.
She doesn't want him charged with the problems that have happened tonight over the broken stuff. She just wanted him out, okay?
Well, everything would be nice and normal and dinner would be on the table and there was always tenseness or some sort of terseness in the air. My parents very rarely used to speak to each other. Anybody used to very rarely speak to each other at the dinner table. And, you know, something would spark off an argument. One of the kids playing with their food or something or other being done or not being done or something like that, and my dad would just fly off the handle.
One time, I remember this one real good, pretty clear. He locked us in the room with my mum. Started arguing. My mum told him to behave, you know, settle down. He wouldn't listen because he was drunk, laughing. And then he jumped on the bed with my mum and started hitting her, threw her around, reefed her by the hair pretty bad. And she got pretty wild and grabbed an opener. It's got a sharp end on it that you're poking like that. And she stabbed my dad right here, but that far in, I mean, that long, that far. But he didn't even know until he woke up because he was still drunk.
My father's favourite trick was he'd love to get cigarettes and stuff. You know, he'd light a cigarette up and he'd push it into Mum's face so she'd, you know, have sort of 2 mil holes in her face. And she'd end up with big burns on her face and that. He used to, that was one of his favourite tricks, and he'd love doing that all the time. You know, I'd have to go out and buy ointment for Mum's face and stuff.
Nothing can describe what it was like. You can't do anything, you know. Just the fact of what's going on, there's nothing to do at all, just to sit back. I mean, you know, to just sort of hide in a corner and just sort of scream.
So what would make you scream, though? What aspect of it?
The fact of seeing, you know, your mother being bashed, what's going to happen to her. You just don't know.
Brutality can happen anywhere, beneath any comfortable roof, in any tidy suburb. But the evidence is that it's more common among the poor, and poverty is growing.
One of the things we have to understand, and I think isn't generally understood in our community, is that there have been massive changes in our society in the space of one generation. We now have, rather than egalitarian society, which we had perhaps 30 years ago, with perhaps 10 or 12% wealthy to rich and maybe 15% poor, we now have a society on the basis of the latest research where 30% are in that well-to-do bracket, but 30% are also in the poor bracket. And that has been a massive shift, literally in the last 15 years, less than one generation. That's a massive change in our society, which has contributed to shaking a lot of families and shaking a lot of children loose from families.
Would you like some chicken?
Each year in New South Wales alone, more than 35,000 wives and children seek shelter in refuges like this. Most have been physically assaulted, but there aren't enough refuges. 2 in every 3 who ask for admission have to be turned away. The lucky ones can stay only a matter of weeks. Their choices are limited. Some will return home to try again, but many will set up on their own. One more single-parent family to add to the 500,000 in Australia. Families are breaking up at a rate unthinkable only a generation ago. Divorce has trebled. The most commonly stated reason for separation is financial pressure. But separation causes even more financial hardship. 3 times more children live in poverty today than 20 years ago. The younger children are, the more they're likely to suffer. At least at school they have somewhere to go. But cheap childcare for their young brothers and sisters at home is almost impossible to find. A parent is forced to choose between poverty on welfare or taking a job and perhaps neglecting the child. Increasingly, communities are intervening to help hard-pressed parents care for their children.
What would you like?
Prior to the breakfast programme, teachers noticed that children were extremely drowsy in the morning, were unattentive, a bit cranky with other children, not in the correct frame of mind to respond to lessons. And we sat down and we thought, well, where do we go from here? What do we do about this? And what are the reasons? And it was decided that one of the most basic needs of any child is to start the day with breakfast.
When you see kids wandering around looking in the garbage bins for lunch, when you have to take kids up, and which I have done, and wash them and show them how to wash and how to use soap and how to use a shower, and then you talk to parents, and the parents might say, well, you know, they know where the fridge is, or they know where the shower is. They can do it for themselves, and I'm talking 5 and 6, 7, 8 years old. The assumption that the kid can look after themselves when there are parents there, because the parent is busy meeting their own needs and coping with their own life.
Things that concern us with regard to abuse is that people don't see, say, neglect as abuse. They seem to think there's something different. We often see cases of kids who are not properly fed, who live in filthy surroundings. Their nappies aren't changed, they're not adequately fed. We've found babies in the past with bottles, 2 or 3 bottles on the cot with curdled milk and things of that nature. I mean, just day by day, they're not given the attention, they're not given the care, they're not given the requirements that they need on a day-to-day basis.
Police have been told 4-year-old Darren was tied by this rope for 4 or 5 days at a time to stop him getting into the cupboards. He has rope burns, scalding from a wet nappy, and when that nappy was removed, an infestation of cockroaches was found. Darren also has a gangrenous right foot.
We're all too well aware these days that children are neglected or assaulted. We report our suspicions far more often than we used to. In one state alone, notifications of child abuse have risen in 6 years from around 1,500 to 22,000 a year. But there are still cases that escape detection. The secrets hidden in this house were only revealed when it caught fire.
There are endless numbers of people who in politics today and in religion and in social welfare are saying, let's get back to basics, let's have values in our society where the family is absolutely paramount, without question. I think that's good and that's undisputed in a whole lot of ways. But it's very simplistic and it's a cliche in a sense because it doesn't solve the problem and it doesn't really address the issue of why kids run away from home and why they get into trouble and why they get involved in crime. If I was asked what the principal reason is for kids getting in trouble and kids being on the street and being in trouble with the law, then I'd have to say that the common thread, over and above this thread of broken down families, the common thread is that the kids I work with have never experienced any degree of respect. That within their family structure, they weren't treated with a sense of value, they weren't treated as being in some way sacred, and therefore their sense of themselves, their sense of being involved with other people has totally broken down.
When I was living at home, I had a lot of problems with my father, who was an alcoholic. He gave us a lot of psychological abuse as well as physical abuse. He never disturbed my brother in any way, but he'd found that he could gain power over my mother and me through degrading us and making us feel useless. And when that didn't work with me, he tried physical abuse. I remember the time that he used to bend me over the kitchen table and take out the electrical cord and whip me across the backside until I screamed. And I really used to scream. I didn't just holler, I screamed. And he used to get great pleasure out of it. And then he'd stop. And I'd walk away to my room and I'd sort of sulk, and then I'd come out and everything would be normal.
The worst memory that came to my mind was when my father just kept on kicking me in the face. He said, I'm gonna make you bleed, I'm gonna make you bleed. And I ended up bleeding, and it wasn't the fact that I was covering scars and that, it was just that I think my heart was bleeding more than anything in my whole entire life, you know. Everything was just bad.
I did give in to him for a while, but by the time I was about 15, I realised slowly that he wanted to see me scream, he wanted to see my mother cry, he wanted to see our lives being torn apart. And very slowly, I began to cut off the pain and shut off and go into a different world. So he could lean me over the kitchen table and he could belt me. And I used to just lie there and turn off, and I didn't feel a thing. And one day, he did this until I was bleeding. I had blood just running down my legs from the electrical cord. It actually cut into my skin and left huge welts. And even today, I still cannot feel any pain whatsoever in my arms or in my legs. I mean, I could give you a demonstration. For a start, I've got a scar on my arm, which I tried to test to see if I could feel any pain deep. I mean, even right now, I could take a cigarette and not feel a thing. I mean, it's nothing. It's dead.
Those who experience violence as children tend to grow into violent adults. Our prisons are full of them. Also passed on from one generation to the next is the trauma of sexual abuse. As a very young boy, this man was sexually abused, and as far back as he can remember, he's had a desire to repeat those sexual acts against young children. He's recently pleaded guilty to 142 charges of sexual abuse, principally against his stepdaughter and her young friends, and is now serving a total of 35 years of imprisonment.
I just couldn't help myself. It's just every time, you know, if I got someone near a young girl, I'd be sexually attracted to her. It used to worry me a lot, you know, that I couldn't stop. That just to turn around and play or fondle the girl, you know. I get sexually excited, and later on I got involved where I allowed other men to have intercourse, another man to have intercourse with my daughter and play with her. And this, I don't know what my feelings, I didn't worry about what was happening. And then just the problem, you know, with the amount of families that I came across that had sexually turned around sex with their own kids, and I know of. There are so many of them, you know, they're doing things like this.
Before the age of 17, 1 girl in 4 and 1 boy in 7 will be sexually abused in some way. More than half of these children will go on to complete what is called the cycle of abuse. They will do to their children, or to other people's, just what was done to them. Even those victims who do not repeat their experiences will never forget it and seldom recover from it.
Well, I was 7 and my mum had a boyfriend. She'd been going out with him around about 8 months by this stage. And one night he decided to come into my bedroom where I slept with me and my 2 sisters. And he decided he'd interfere with us, where I got the worst feelings. I never handled it. I screamed. My mum wasn't home. She was working. And she told me if I said anything to my mum, that he'd kill me and hurt my mum. And he said to my sisters as well. Then as time went on, 3 months later, I was still having bleeding, and I told my mum, and she told me it was just my monthlies. And
But at that stage you're only 8 years old, is that right?
No, I was still 7.
Still 7. And she thought that that your period had started?
Yeah. So, I went to school and I started ripping out my hair, and they took me to a counsellor and I wouldn't talk. And then they ended up getting me to a doctor, and they realised I'd been interfered with. So he was charged because my sister stopped him in anyway.
You weren't able to tell your mother?
No, he told me if I told my mum, he'd kill me and my sisters and hurt my mum. So it was only from my sisters that he was stopped in.
And were you being physically assaulted also?
Yeah, he'd belt me around. He would never touch my other sisters, it was always me. And when my mum found out that we'd dobbed him in, she was on drugs, and she started getting violent with us.
So what sort of things happened to you then?
My jaw was smashed. Was put in hospital. Always neglected. Tied into beds. I've got scars on the sides of my body from the rope burns.
So who was tying you in bed?
My mum.
So why was she tying you to the bed?
Otherwise I wouldn't stay in it. That's her excuse. Every time she'd go out, she'd tie me up in the bed. She used to work at a club.
So what sort of hours would she go out?
She'd leave about 7:30 at night and wouldn't be home until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning.
And she'd tie you to the bed before she left?
Yeah.
How old were you at that stage?
Would have been just after my court case, 8, nearly 9. I started really getting tied into the bed. I was having plain rope across my actual body without any protection. And a blanket over me.
Children suffering at home may bring their problems to school, providing us with one of the few windows into the world of abuse.
Without a doubt, over the last couple of years, the incidence of physical and sexual abuse has increased, and our awareness of it has increased. We are now, as teachers and counsellors, mandatory notifiers. We have to tell wherever the government agency facts, wherever we suspect a case of sexual or physical abuse. So it could be we have to keep an eye out for kids who arrive with marks, bruises, cigarette burns, and you see a fair few of them. Where there's, say in this case of sexual abuse, promiscuous sexual behaviour. We have to look at their artwork. We have to look at the stories they're writing. We can't necessarily rely on kids to tell us that it's happening at home, because kids don't. Victims don't tell when they've been abused, because part of the abuse is the intimidation of silence and maintaining that conspiracy. And very often the families are aware of what's going on, but to keep the family going, they'll subscribe to what's going on.
So it was just pointing out what we're saying.
The conspiracy of silence is being broken. At Shepparton Tech in mid-western Victoria, welfare teacher Bronwyn Derrick has brought together girls who have been sexually assaulted at home.
Yeah, that's a good idea, really.
Here this group is able to break the feelings of guilt that often plague the sexually abused child.
I was one of the founding members that started the group off, and it's only been going for a few months, and the amount of people that's come through, which is really surprising to me. I mean, most of them are my friends, and it's quite a shock when you see one of your friends walk into this group and have been through the same experience as you, and it's surprising to see that it's really happening.
teachers are now faced with a dilemma. If a child confides in them about violence at home, they must take official action, but the best interests of the child are not always served.
Yeah, I'd do that if I were you.
One little boy came to me one morning crying and showed me his back, which he had also shown to a few of his friends, and they were there too, to say that his father had beaten him up with an iron bar. Now, when that sort of thing happens to a teacher and the child is obviously upset and all the other children are upset and they look to you to do something about it, but you know what to do. Your duty is quite clear. The rules and guidelines are laid down. If a teacher finds out a student is being abused, you report it. You report it to the principal, who will do something else about it. But if you say to the child, we have to tell the principal and we have to get some help for you about this, and the child cries more and clings to you and says, please, please don't tell anybody because my father will beat me again if he finds out that I've told anybody. It tears you apart because you can see this, and you also know what the child doesn't know is that he'll be given directions by juvenile aid if they're brought in. They'll say to him, you have to make a choice now, sonny. If you want to make a complaint, we can take you away from your father. We can put you in a foster home. Your father will never be able to find you because we'll move you to a distant place if necessary. You'll be quite safe. But the kid doesn't know anything about the foster home. He's terrified. He'd rather be with his father. Even he mightn't beat him tomorrow night, or he mightn't beat him tonight. He'd be all right for a little while and he's with his family. When you know that the father is violent and you know that that has been part of the scene for a long time, it makes you feel terrible. But I mean, you can't play God. You can't. I feel that you can't go against the child's wishes either.
The government took me off my parents for the first time. I would have been 10. They put me in a foster care home, and I was there for a fair while, a few months, and then they sent me back to my parents.
And how long did you stay with your parents?
Only a matter of weeks. As soon as I went back, I started running away again.
Why was that?
I couldn't handle it. My mum had hit me or something, or I'd get picked on. So I'd just run away to the family. And one of the last time I ran away there, I had bruises all over my body. The government still sent me back to them. They had photographs of it.
And what explanation did they give when they sent you back?
Your parents want you home.
To remove an abused child from their family is to make them suffer in a different way. But worst of all is the way they punish themselves. Many seek release in violence or escape in drugs.
People say it's easy for kids when they're young. They can get over it by the time they're an adult, but they don't. Well, I still haven't. I don't know about other rape cases, but I've never got over it, and I don't think I'll ever will.
I'm just mixed up. I'm sort of gaining my problems slowly. Like I was seeing a psychiatrist about 2-3 months ago, and I felt really ashamed because I thought, well, you know, I'm mixed up. I must be crazy or something. And she said to me, and I still remember these words today, she said, if you don't get help now, you're going to kill somebody or kill yourself. And she was 100% right, and I didn't have to tell her that, eh?
Well, I started drugs when I was pretty young, about 7. Started drinking alcohol and that when I was about 7. I started smoking cigarettes, excuse me, when I was about 7 as well.
What about other drugs?
Started smoking and using glue. I started sniffing glue when I was 13. And from that day on now, till now, I still sniff.
How often do you sniff glue?
I sniff about a litre a day.
A litre a day?
Just to blank out or block out all the things that have happened to me.
What sort of things?
With being incest and being bashed and raped. And my mum doesn't really care about me, you know, maybe because she was a young mother.
What sort of things happened in your family?
Well, when I was incest, my whole family were incest, excuse me, and but it wasn't just sex, it was, you know, like things with dogs and stuff like that. It's pretty off, really off stuff. And I was with my brothers as well. My father was incesting my brothers.
How long did that go on for?
Till I was 11. And then I told someone when I was 11. Told my mum. She nearly smashed the car. And she took me to the police station. And then they charged my father with incest. And he went in jail for about 2 months. And then he's still alive now.
How do you feel about your father?
I mean, I can't really trust many people. Like, if I couldn't trust my own father, who can I trust? So I have to have a drink or a sniff before I can mix with people. You know, like, it's just so hard to trust people.
I first started off on drugs when I was about 12, 13. I started off smoking pot and stuff. Then I just needed to go for something heavier. So I got into glue, liquid paper thinners, petrol, you know, anything I could get. And it just led me on and on and on and on to just a full-time addiction. And I was on, you know, petrol and that more. Then I was on, you know, pot, and it's just really frightening, you know. You get into petrol and just, you blow your brain cells out. I ended up in hospital through petrol. I got this datura tree. It's a Chinese flowering plant. You smoke and it's got 2 to 3 more times powerful than pot. And I was smoking that. And I just didn't feel satisfied, so I got into a bag of petrol. It was in a drain and I fell asleep and the petrol bag was on my face. And a street kid or somebody, I don't know, still to this day I don't know who found me, but they rang the ambulance and put me in hospital. Sort of spent, you know, a week in hospital. And I started from just one simple thing, I mean, and it just got worse and worse and worse.
What sort of feelings do you have when you feel that you have to go and sniff glue and take heroin?
I get really angry if I don't have anything. Not angry, just really frustrated. But when I have something, I feel all right.
What sort of things?
What, in frustration?
No, what sort of things do you have to calm you down?
Just anything. you know, like glue or heat.
You start hallucinating, you start tripping out. You go from certain stages, you know, like 1 minute you'd be hallucinating, next minute you'd be running around. The next minute you'd fall down, you'd fall asleep, then you'd start smashing your head against mirrors or something like that until you bleed for the pleasure. And it's not worth it.
What pleasure do you get out of bleeding?
For me at the time, it was a lot of satisfaction. It's just seeing yourself pouring out with blood just gives you that pleasure. It's just, I don't know, it's hard to describe, it's just weird.
Have you tried to come off the glue?
Yeah, I've been off it a few times. But I just get straight back into it.
What do you think it's doing to your head?
Don't know, killing me, I suppose.
Are you going to try and go to detox and get off it?
Yeah, I've been in detox before. A few times I've been into Odyssey and I've been into Kalara and heaps of detoxes, but I've just never stuck them out.
Why is that?
It's just the pressure. I just can't handle the fact of being incest.
But that happened quite a few years back now.
Yeah, but it's still there, kind of. You know, it's... I think what I have to do is just do something about him so I don't have to be scared or anything.
About your father? But what sort of thing would you have to do?
I suppose kill him. Or make him kill himself.
I was 13 when I got into arson. I burnt an institution, 4 bedrooms in an institution down. I also got charged along with the arson as willful damage. In that week I absconded from the institution, broke out with 3 people. I got done for breaking in as 2. Assault. Because I hit some lady because I was rolling her and I hit her.
You were robbing her, were you?
Yeah. With my father, it was nearly attempted murder.
What did you do to him?
Well, I put a gun to his head and I was going to pull the trigger, but the police walked in the door, pulled the gun away, and then I was going to kill him, but they brought it down to an attempted murder and I hadn't even touched him.
But you had intended to kill him?
I had intended, in every right. I set 4 guns up in the house, 1 under my bed, 1 downstairs on the table, 1 up in his bedroom under the bed, and 1 in the spare bedroom. And I had intended to kill him. In some ways I still wish I had.
What we have to understand in Australia, what our community has to understand, what our government has to understand, what we've all got to take responsibility for, is that many of these children are in desperate trouble. They are in situations where they feel that they have no alternative if they're being badly abused or if they're victims of incest or if they're being raped. No alternative but to leave home. One witness, I thought, put it well to the inquiry. He said, many people say these kids have left home, but very often home's left them. And that's exactly what came through in the evidence, time and again, in every city we went to, in every state, in every territory. These are children who've been abused. They've been badly dealt with. Sometimes their family has simply disintegrated around them and they've been cast adrift.
You gotta be a survivor. You gotta be tough enough to survive. If you don't, you're just virtually dead. Especially after the crisis. You gotta know how to talk to people. You gotta know how to treat them back. You don't take any bullshit off them, or they think they can walk all over you. And you just gotta know the ropes. You learn as you go along. I tried to commit suicide by slashing my wrist with a razor. Didn't work. Still here. I thought about it a lot. Doing a proper job, taking overdoses, sleeping tablets or something. Thought about all of them. But I'm a survivor, as everyone says. So I gotta keep surviving. Do something good in my life, where most people say, all my life people have said she's gonna be a no one. She's not gonna, when she's 18, she's gonna be in a gutter, calling out for help, and everyone's just gonna say, oh, get fucked. That's what welfare say to me, that my life's gonna be. I've gotta prove them wrong, which I plan to do. So far I've proved them wrong. I'm gonna keep proving them wrong.
Tonight, an estimated 40,000 children are on the streets in our cities and country towns. Many have nowhere to go. Their families have totally disintegrated. Many have run away from a home which offers them no shelter, but cruelty and violence. Some as young as 6 and 7 years old. All are under intense stress. Life for the homeless child is a grueling struggle for survival.
Hi. How are you? What are you up to? With my place to stay.
Have you been here before?
No.
No. How old are you?
17.
Got any ID or anything like
When
that?
there's no home, no support from friends or relatives, public welfare or private charity have to fill the gap.
Right, okay. Come in. Just take a seat in here.
These refuges are designed specifically for homeless kids, but there are only a few, and they can't keep pace with the demand. Poor funding and a spate of cutbacks have meant that they turn away more than they can house.
I just got to get you to fill out a form contract.
Many only offer overnight or crisis accommodation. Within a few days, they must move on.
We have a problem in Australia with the sort of responses that we make to homeless kids. We tend to offer up crisis services that work with young people for a maximum maybe of 6 weeks. Now the problem here is that you're just dealing with their basic accommodation crisis, you might be getting them into alternative accommodation. But if they're chronically homeless, you're doing nothing to end their homelessness. And kids often just go on a refuge circuit. And you talk to kids who've stayed in every refuge in the city that they're in, and maybe in just about every capital city.
We've set up a shuttle of homeless children between refuges right around the country. And unfortunately, one of the problems of homelessness is that people move too frequently so that they can't get adequate health care, they can't continue their education, they can't get proper assistance. But we've set up a system that has reinforced that need to move constantly. And that, tragically, on the basis of the evidence, has been pretty disastrous for many young children.
With no stable home, they don't go to school. With no schooling, they can't get work. With no work, they can't set up a stable home. They live from day to day and from night to night.
I've slept in some places which normal everyday people would call unusual. I've slept in, I suppose, toilet blocks and cane fields, garages, and any sort of place that I could possibly squeeze into. When I left home, I thought I had this great dream. I'd go out to the big wide world and I'd get work and I'd find a place to stay and I'd have a boyfriend and we'd get married and we'd have kids and we'd live happily ever after. But it didn't turn out that way, unfortunately. The first night I spent in the toilet on ceramic tiles, and I got very, very cramped in the legs because I wasn't wearing anything. I wasn't wearing sufficient clothing to keep me warm, and it was in the middle of winter. Of course, I had to walk around a lot of the night, and I got very little sleep, and I had some Aboriginal lady that smelt really bad, and she'd obviously been drinking bourbon, and she was vomiting pretty badly, and she'd come up and slept next to me. And that was the only way I could keep warm. And the smell of vomit and bourbon was just so strong, I would just about chuck myself.
In car parks I've slept under shop awnings and in people's gardens and on people's verandas, all sorts of weird and wonderful places. I even slept under the harbour bridge once, just to keep out of the rain.
The main thing was keeping warm during the cold season, which was very difficult. I found that by getting toilet paper and wrapping it around my legs didn't help at all. I needed something to keep the heat in, so I'd wet the toilet paper and wrap it around my legs to keep them from being cramped. And the cold really cramped up my legs. So well, when I wrapped the toilet paper around, I found it kept them rather warm. And actually I found water to be a great help because it does stay warm for quite a while. Most people think if you put water on you, you get cold, but that's not the case at all. It warms you up. I found that at 5 o'clock in the morning when they hose down the streets, go for a walk on that and you can feel the heat rising, and it's the most beautiful thing you've ever felt after you've spent a cold night out.
Or I'd sleep in Good Samaritan bins most of the time. The big clothing bins, big Smith family bins and stuff. There's one down in Surrey Hills. I was sleeping in one up here in the Cross, but someone else took over it. It's like a squat, you know, you had your own turf and whatnot. Certain people slept in certain bins and had your name written on it and all this sort of thing. Someone took over mine, so I had to go and find another one. I found one down in Surrey Hills, and I didn't know what was in it or anything, usually clothes. And I jumped in it, and just so happened it was full of rats. So that wasn't the best, and I had to try and get out, and the door was jammed. Climbing up the walls, let me out, let me out. And there's millions of rats running all around the place and screaming and screeching and carrying on. I finally got out, and there was one still on me back, right up here near me neck.
In the cane fields, the best thing that I've found is to dig a hole in the soil and to cover yourself up in the sand. It might be a bit gritty, you'll stay warm, the body heat will stay in, and circulation would go and you wouldn't get cramped up. On the beaches and that, if you haven't got a tarp and it's raining and you're out in the bush, the best thing you can do is just bury yourself in sand and leave your face sticking out.
In theory, if you're young and homeless, you can qualify for a government allowance. In practice, only one homeless child in 20 threads its way through the bureaucratic maze. Even for those who are successful, they must somehow survive a gap of 6 weeks before any payment is made. And then the prize is meagre. It's based on the belief that life is cheaper if you're under 18. But children forced to survive on their own soon discover that there are no junior rents, no junior prices for clothes, and they must pay full price for food.
For young people who are under 18, the social security benefit's incredibly low. It's around $25 a week at the moment, and if you're under 15, it's nothing at all. Now, if you qualify for the young homeless allowance, it's a bit better, but very few young people qualify. So it's nearly impossible for these kids to survive without reverting to crime.
Well, I was 7 years old, the first time I ever left home. I was on the street for about 6 months. I was terrified. I mean, terrified. I didn't know what way to go. I didn't know anybody. It was like a new world, except it was the worst world out. The first place I went to was a valley, and in Brisbane, that's a real slum area, you know.
That's Fortitude Valley, is it?
Yeah, Fortitude Valley. There's a lot of street kids around that area, and I was scared, you know, and the way I had to survive was either kicking old ladies, ripping off their handbags and running.
At age 7?
Yeah, that was the only way I could do it. I mean, like, I couldn't go to children's service because I know they'd put me back with my father. And I didn't want that because I was just frightened.
When I was living on the street, I was living living on park benches, parks, and I eventually got, like, a friend of mine was living in a squat. I eventually went and stayed with her for a while, and there was about 11 people there, and it just wasn't the right place to stay. Like, there was hookers and all that, and there was people that go and rip off cars. They'd be coming in, you know, they'd be coming in every 10 minutes with, here, I got this, you know, you want to buy it off me, you know. Just they'd do it for money. They'd steal things, they'd break into houses, you know, steal tellies, videos, stereos.
There's a park, New Farm Park, and all the ladies go down there for lunch, you know, after work or something. And you'd sit up in a tree and you'd wait for him to sit on a bench or something, and you'd jump down on them, bowl them over, grab their handbag and run.
I did one break and enter, but I never got caught. It was only because we only break into the house to get food. It was about 4 other people. All we really wanted was food, and we did, you know. And just smoking pot and getting caught for it, and sitting like that, they'd steal cars, you know, and they'd take them down there, you know. If it was really cold, we'd all pile into the car and sit in the car, you know.
So what, you'd steal cars just to sleep the night in them?
Or just break into them, take them to a park somewhere, park them, sleep in them, you know. We only did it because we only really wanted somewhere to live, you know, somewhere nice to live. I mean, it was the worst place to live, yeah, but at least we had somewhere to sleep and, you know, we had food to eat because we'd break in the houses for food. So all we really wanted was food and sleep.
If I want to get somewhere, I have to walk because I don't have a car, I can't afford a bus. But I know a lot of young girls, friends of mine, who have told me that when they didn't have the money to pay for a taxi fare, they've had to, you might say, pull out the hairy checkbook or, well, screw to get the way round.
You know, if people don't really understand what's going on, but there's a real world out there where where kids have to do things that they don't like to survive.
They're drawn like moths to the city lights. They slide quickly, within days in many cases, into a world which has no ethics and no rules beyond the simple law of survival. It's a world in which crime or prostitution are almost unavoidable. When you first left home, you worked for a time as a prostitute. What led you into that?
I had nowhere else to go. I had no money. And it was the easiest thing to do.
How old were you then?
15.
And at age 12, how did you go about it?
I didn't. The first one I ever did, I used to get asked all the time, you know, if I was working or anything, but I didn't. The first time I did it, I wanted to say no, but I said yes when someone came up to me. It was this old Italian guy, and I said yes. And the whole time that I went and did it, I was crying. I just didn't know what I was doing. And then from there, I didn't want to do it again. And I didn't do it again till I was 13 or 14. And then I started working a bit, like once or twice a week, or, you know, once a fortnight or something.
For kids on the street, the only real friends they have are other feral children also struggling to survive. In the absence of their parents, adult role models become older prostitutes, streetwise spruikers and pimps. The very young are especially vulnerable. How young would those girls be?
I'm sorry to say, the younger the better. Quite sorry. Someone can be very young. The one I came across is the youngest I've come across is 12. And
were you involved in that?
I was involved in making love, so-called. Well, brought back to the group and having to make love and actually teach them sex, teach them how to go on about better sex and being able to fulfill that task. And
what do you mean better sex?
Well, to be able to accept oral sex and be able to relax at times. When they shouldn't fight it when something's going to be new to them.
Like what? What sort of things?
Anal sex, mouth, just the whole thing, just everything. Like, it's like, this is what the customer wants, okay? It's like a factory here. You condition them, you work on them, work. It's a bit of work into that.
Of course, sometimes the work has already been done. At home by dad or uncle or stepfather. 7 out of every 10 working prostitutes have a background of sexual assault. These ruined children are a rich source for exploitation.
I've been working on the street ever since I was about 13.
So what sort of things happened to you while you were working on the streets?
You got raped or bashed or people stole off you. You might have a friend now and then, but in the end they just rip you off because you got clothes or money or something.
Did you try and get out of prostitution?
Yeah, I haven't worked for 6 months.
And what are the chances of you staying out of prostitution now?
Heaps, because it's just really hit me that I didn't really like working anyway, but I was kind of pressured into working.
How were you pressured?
Just by, if you're good looking or if you're good looking, they'll just grab you, you know, and make you work for them or make you get a little bit of a habit, and the next minute you've got a raging habit, so you're theirs, you know.
What's the youngest that they've been able to get?
Well, what I heard through one of the bigger guys there, bigger pimps, really hard he was that a 7-year-old was in his hand. He made a lot of money, he says.
So if you can find a 7-year-old girl and get her into your group of pimps, then she's a great money-making asset, is she?
Yeah, to get a 7-year-old, well, there was a lot of options even then, because it seems ambitions start to flare up in the pimp business, like to take even photos and acts and filming if it's possible, and to go on with that even, it's just so open. She's so new to it all anyway, and the person.
Would you get that 7-year-old to perform in pornographic films? And
yeah, if it's possible, you could, and sell that again to somebody else who can do whatever they like with it. It's just, it's really hot stuff.
The trade in underage sex is controlled like any other by supply and demand. The homeless, the vulnerable, the desperate create the supply. But it's thousands of outwardly respectable Australians who provide the demand.
The people that come up to the wall are usually rich people, usually married, with kids, and usually tell the wife that they're going out, you know, to watch football or over to the mate's place or something, and come up and pick us up, and usually a baby car seat in the back of the car, and they're usually over 50 years old, which is pretty sickening. But you get all sorts. I've had policemen, I had a priest. He was a really strange one actually. Wanted me to put on a schoolboy's uniform and sit there and pretend, you know, that he was my headmaster, and, you know, wanted to give me a spanking and all this sort of thing. And so I had some really strange ones up there, but you get used to it after a while. It's money, so.
Not everyone who works at the wall is gay.
That is the perception, though.
Yes. That's only because of society, because society thinks that someone who's a boy who sells themselves for money to another man is automatically homosexual. Some people only do it for the money.
So why would they need the money? Why would they need it so badly?
They're either to buy drugs, they would need the money to buy drugs, or they genuinely need to live off that money that they make. There are like people up there that just, what the money they get is what they live off. That is their sole income, because some of them are so young that they can't even get a job anywhere. You know.
How young are some of those kids?
12, 13.
How did you feel? You're only 17 now and you were 14 when you were up there.
When I was up there and I met people that young, I was really ashamed of it for my own self.
Ashamed in what way?
I felt ashamed because the people, how their parents have put them into a situation like that, so to speak, like they've lost the communication with someone that young and they've had to move out of home or they've been kicked out. And I felt really sorry for them because they had to go through that. It's not exactly easy or simple, and I'm not going to glorify it or anything. I do more than condemn it.
Some people would say that kids leave home to have fun.
Working at the wall as a prostitute is not a sense of fun. It is the sole means of survival. When I first arrived there, I didn't know what to do really. I sort of looked around and observed everyone else and what they were doing first, and they were just standing around and talking and things like that. And then I was left by myself. They just sort of floated away into nowhere, and I thought, what do I do now? And then I just sat there. It would have to be about an hour later. A car pulled up, and this guy wound down the passenger window, and he said hello, and I said hello back to him. And my first impression was yuck. He was fat, ugly, balding. I've seen better backs on buses. He wasn't anything exciting. And he started talking to me. He asked how much it had cost to do certain things, to have sex with him, and I gave the price. He agreed. I got in the car. From the time I got into the car, I felt like I was closed in something that I could not get out of. And we arrived at this place where you go to have sex. You pay money and you can hire a room out for an hour. And we went up there and he got undressed. I felt really intimidated and I slowly got undressed. And as we were having sex, I remember thinking that all my moral standards and manners and everything that my parents ever taught me were gone. I was just this piece of meat for this guy, for him to get his rocks off.
When kids are on the streets, it's really difficult to imagine what they will have to do, for a warm bed and so forth. And they're so easily exploited. I mean, I think of one young guy who came in to see me, and he was telling me about the night before and how he'd stayed with this particular guy. And I asked him what he got out of it, and he simply said, because he'd obviously had a lot of sexual activity and so forth, but he was paid with a packet of cigarettes. So basically for his night of sex, being used and abused by a fairly well-known Sydney businessman, actually, in this particular case, it got him a warm bed and a packet of cigarettes. And it's that sort of thing that kids will, they get to a point where they'll do anything, and they're so easily exploited by people because of that.
I used to work, and I work to use. Just about everyone uses heroin that I hung around with. If they don't use heroin, they use speed or cocaine. I don't know anyone on the streets that's straight that doesn't use something.
But one shot won't hurt. One shot will get me mind off it. I won't do it again after this one. And then I have one, and then I have another, and another, and another. And then just one morning I woke up and found out I needed it. At first I was just doing it because I wanted to. And in the end I was doing it because I had to.
And how much were you spending at some stage?
I was using a weight a day. It was $350 a day.
So you'd have to somehow every day get $350?
I was practically working the wall 24 hours.
How important were drugs to those young girls?
Drugs to those young girls was, to them, it was to be accepted, to be part of it. To the pimps, to us pimps, it was a necessity at times. It was a necessity to get them to be out of it, not to see the reality of it. When they're seen through some mist, get that drug into them, and eventually they end up getting hooked. And what happens from there? or addiction, you do things you don't want, do many things, it's all yets. Whatever there is to do, it's a yet for a person who's addicted after that. I mean, become so reliant on, well, coming back to the pimp stage, so reliant on a person for the drug, they don't care. They don't care what happens to them.
In derelict and abandoned houses in all our cities, thousands of street kids are forced to seek shelter each night. There's little joy in these young lives. For months and sometimes years, happiness is a dry floor to sleep on and a fix in the morning sun.
This is where people have a shot in the morning because the light comes through. The light comes through, this is the only room in the house that would have all the light to have their shot so they'd see what they were doing.
What about the sexual thing?
This is probably heroin. I don't know, it could be speed or anything. It's people's fits. Really. You gotta be careful when you're walking around in that because there's a lot around. So people break the ends off and you can walk on them, they go straight through your shoes sometimes. You don't know what you can get. It's pretty sick place to live in, really.
What was the worst thing about living in here?
Just with the cops and that, when they came through and sometimes they busted the place and that, you just have to listen for people or just listen to... You didn't really get a whole night's sleep. You had to always listen for someone that was like in the house. You didn't know who was going to come in because you can't see them. It's so dark. You just have to be careful.
And how long were you living here?
A few years.
How old were you when you first came here?
About 12 I started squatting.
How old are you now?
I'm 17. Obviously someone's cooked up a shot here. There's spoons and everything everywhere. Just heaps of... No one really cares what they throw on the floor, so you just got to be careful about, like, there's condoms and everything. Shit. Heaps of filters and stuff in the shots.
What are the filters used for?
You mix up your shot. You put your needle on the end so it doesn't bar, so it doesn't like blunt the needle, and you suck it up off the filter, you know.
How long were you doing that?
I used for about 6 years. And it's just stopped 4 months ago. This is the bathroom. There's no water in it. It's not used much at all. This room's not really good because all the water gets into it because of the rain, and it stays really damp because it's got carpet in it. There's usually about 50 kids in these squats. A lot of them are really young, but they don't usually last that long, the young ones. They usually go after a few days or a couple of weeks. There's all the time, when there's really young girls around, like about 12 or 13, all the blokes will try to get onto them and hassle them a lot. Get them into whatever they can, not with drugs or anything or working. They just use them. This is my old bed, my room. I stayed in this room for about 2 years on and off. It's a pretty good room because the floor doesn't stay really wet when it rains. And it gets a lot of light so you can see what you're doing sometimes. And there's usually a lot of people in this room. There's usually about 10 of us in here on a cold night. There's no electricity, there's no water, no gas. Sometimes I had candles for light and stuff. Or we lit a fire in a bin or something and put it at the end of the room. But that's how a lot of fires started, and candles burning out. A lot of fires started, so I had to be careful because usually we're too stoned and we just fell asleep and left it. And luckily someone had woken up and put it out or something, but a lot of times you just let them burn and it burns the place down. Catches on fire on a bed or something. A few young kids used to bring back clients to the squats. Sort of just the desperate clients, I suppose, because you'd have to be desperate to go with a kid to a squat. I think they were sick, those guys. No one's healthy on the street. Someone's always got something wrong with them, you know. It might be a cold or sore foot or something, but usually you get sick at home when you got somewhere to live and it doesn't affect you as bad. You got no one to look after you and you don't look after yourself.
What do you normally eat while you're on the streets?
Well, not very much.
What have you eaten today?
Well, I haven't eaten nothing today. Yesterday I had a few lollies. Day before, I was eating just a bit of chicken meat, lollies, chips, cold chips, CCs and that.
And how often do you eat lollies throughout the day?
Well, I'll get about $2 thing of lollies and just munch away on them.
So that's your
my
main
meal. That's my meal for the day. Lollies, chips. We can't afford to buy, 3-course meals or something. We can't really even afford to buy a proper meal.
And if you did have some money, what would you eat?
Vegetables, meat, just things that are good for you.
How long, while you're living in squats, how long is it between, say, showers and baths and that?
Well, I haven't had a shower for nearly a week and a half.
Most of these kids suffer all of the medical problems that most people would suffer, except to a much greater degree. And this is largely because even when they do seek treatment, and that is if they do seek treatment, they tend not to be very compliant with the treatment they're given. So whilst they might come in with a chest infection, they might be prescribed antibiotics, the chances that they'll actually take a full course of antibiotics are quite remote. Then they also have special problems specific to them, which are largely a result of the sort of environment that they live in. That is, if they're lucky enough to find a place to sleep under a roof, chances are that the bed might have bed bugs and they will suffer from various skin infestations. Generally speaking, they have a lot of skin problems. And again, their entire personal hygiene is suboptimal, so even when they do seek treatment for these things, they tend to go on chronically, whereas if somebody by accident slept in a bed with bugs, it might be easily treatable within a week, but in their case it will go on for many months and perhaps for years.
One of the young boys on the streets that I've known for a while, and been a male prostitute for about 12 months, surviving just on the streets. I mean, he doesn't make much money out of it, but he survives. And I said to him one day, aren't you concerned about AIDS with all the publicity and everything else that's around? And he just looked at me as if I was stupid. I asked him whether he was using condoms and so forth. And he said that he could never catch AIDS, he could never catch a sexually transmitted disease. And when I asked him why, he simply said, well, I don't have sex with females. And he had this very simplistic sort of approach. And it really hit me that, that a lot of the education, a lot of the stuff that we provide for young people just doesn't get down to the level of the streets, to some of these kids. They're just totally oblivious to it. They don't read, they don't watch TV, they don't listen to the radio sometimes, and they're just totally oblivious to what's going on.
I know a guy that died from AIDS, and he didn't even know what AIDS was, even when he had it. He still didn't know why he was dying. He never found out. He died from it. He got really sick and died.
What sort of chances have you taken?
I've shared needles. I've had sex without condoms. That hasn't been recently. I mean, I've shared needles recently with people that I thought I could trust, but you don't know. I don't care sometimes. As long as I get a shot, I don't care. I don't think about it.
What our federal and state governments have to understand is it's not just a question of how much it costs to help these homeless children. It's a question of the enormous cost if we don't do something about their problems, because they're our problems too. The fact is that there is an enormous cost to these children themselves, to their quality of life. In some cases they're dying. But secondly, there's an enormous economic cost which you can actually quantify. There's the cost that many of these children will be to our society because they'll get involved in petty criminal activity to survive, become involved in the juvenile justice system and end up in institutions or prisons where the average cost is $40,000 per person per year. Secondly, there's the cost to our health system of large numbers of these homeless children being afflicted with very serious diseases, some leading to cancer. There's increasing evidence that homeless children are much more prone than most of the community to become infected with the AIDS virus, and many other health problems. And finally, there's the very real cost that many of these children will be permanently unemployable if we don't do something about this, and the economic cost in the short, medium and long term to our social welfare system is going to be extremely large. There's one more dimension, and that is there's a cost to the wider community. The cost of having an alienated, dispossessed underclass of children who feel that nobody cares about them and they don't really have a place in the mainstream of our society. And they will, if they continue to grow in number, threaten the property and the well-being of Mr. and Mrs. Average, if you like, because those kids will be fighting to survive.
This outwardly ordinary community near Brisbane is attempting to solve the problem of homeless and damaged children. And it's finding that even with the bleakest history, there can be hope.
My mum died when I was 6. My father died a year after when I was 7. And then after they died, I went into a foster home. The father of the family used to take me down the back shed, and they used to have this big leather strap, must have been off a harness or something, and they used to have a weight, top of a wool weight thing, and I used to grip on the top of that, and he took me pants down, gripped on top of that, and he used to beat me until I shit myself, and sometimes he'd just keep on going. I remember one time he beat me so hard I just fell on the ground, and he just, he said, that'll teach you, and rubbed my face and my own shit, and he told me to clean it up.
How often would things like that happen?
Oh, about 3 times a week.
How old were you then?
I would have been about 10, 9.
For years after that, Tony ran away repeatedly. Time and again he was forced to go back. That a boy with that background should end up earning a regular wage, with a stable home to go to, is a minor miracle. He owes it to Wynnum Manly's Bayside Adolescent Boarding Incorporated, or BABI as the locals call it. It's a network of counsellors and parents who have opened their homes to children at risk. It's like an extended family, somewhere to run to that's safer than the street, somewhere far better for the abused child than a soulless institution.
When we look at young people and think about what used to happen to them, you know, if there was something going wrong, they would be separated out, not only from their family, but also from their friends. Their family may have been in disarray, but to remove them from where they live, you take them away from their family, from their friends, so their relatives maybe, from their school, from any support system that's there, and so they become really isolated. And more often than not, the problems within the family were not really the fault of the young person, so they were in fact penalised by being removed from this area. And so that was really the key to it, was to keep them within that system, keep them near their school so they can just continue doing the normal things that you or I would like to do. And that's really important for them. And so when we set the organisation up, the idea was that we only take young people from this district so that it becomes almost like a family, and that in fact is what BABI has developed into. It's developed into the BABI family.
BABI has shown me lots of things. It's shown me how to open up with people. As you know, I was badly beaten, and my trust in people just went. And with that trust, I thought I'd never gain it back. I promised myself, why trust anyone when they're just going to hurt me again? And but BABI showed me you have to trust people. You have to open up to people, and so it's been good for me with BABI because I thought I'd never gain that trust back. It's like losing your arm, and you know you won't gain your arm back because you lost it. Trust is just like that. Once you lose trust in a person, and you won't gain it back. But I did, and it was quite amazing. I'm still learning to trust people, and it's like a new life for me. It's quite remarkable.
The most important thing about BABI is that it's extremely successful for the children, successful for the community, and from the point of view of federal and state governments, extremely cost effective in terms of addressing this very serious social problem. That community is putting in 2,500 hours of voluntary work a week. The government is only contributing 2.5% of the costs. And yet BABI is virtually unique. It's virtually the only program of its type in Australia. And we need many more BABIs. We need our communities more involved, because that is the only way we are going to address the needs of many of these homeless children in an adequate way.
I think that for the next 20 or 30 years, unless things change, unless I get out of the pills and get out of this lifestyle, this is where I'll be, in this sort of scene. And I think that's what's going to happen with a lot of this generation. And possibly the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And the whole world is just shut off, and you feel Yes, they say they care. They really love you. They really care for you. They're really worried about you. But they don't do anything about it. They say there's nothing they can do about it. But if somebody really wanted to do something about it, I'm sure there is something that could be done about it.
For the thousands of kids attempting to survive on the streets around Australia tonight, their plight is immediate and their needs obvious. There are hundreds of thousands of other children who may still have homes and families, but our schools are failing to educate them. Our industries can no longer employ them. Our society has no real place for them. These children look to a future where welfare dependence is entrenched, where work is a privilege, not a right, where frustration and anger may lead to senseless acts of violence, and a life for many of stagnation and waste. In our final program, we look at the 500,000 young Australians who, unless we act now, may join a swelling underclass who already feel they're nobody's children.